Bambiz presents Elder Law Growth, the podcast where we share what's actually working in elder law and estate planning marketing straight from the team behind it. Let's get to it.
Welcome back to the Elder Law Growth podcast presented by Bambiz, the team that helps elder law and estate planning attorneys grow their firms, fill their workshops, and connect with their communities using marketing that actually works. Learn more at bambiz.net. I'm Jason, and today I'm joined by Richard Zack, founder, CEO, and CTO of Eternal Me. Richard brings over 25 years of enterprise software experience, and he launched Eternal Me after seeing firsthand how traditional estate planning tools fall short, especially when it comes to digital assets and modern client intake. Today, we're talking about why traditional estate intake systems break down, how that costs firms clients, and why treating intake as living data leads to better outcomes. Richard, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Jason. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And so I guess my first question going straight into everything is, for people meeting you for the first time, what is Eternal Me and what problems are you most focused on solving for estate planning firms?
Yeah, absolutely. So Eternal Me is a software platform built specifically for estate planning and elder care law firms. And the core problem we're solving is that with the intake process. And that's how firms actually collect the information from their clients that they need to complete the estate plan, to complete their work. And what we found is that the traditional processes were really designed for a world that doesn't exist anymore, built around things like physical assets. And of course, those are important, but that hasn't really evolved with the way the world has gone and with the direction of technology. Today, every client walks in with a digital life that's just as valuable, in many cases more complicated, maybe even more valuable than their physical one. But most law firms are actually still capturing all this information with legal pads, email, forms, and those functions are very problematic when we start thinking about a living estate and when we start thinking about digital assets. So our company and our platform was built to replace that whole workflow with something structured, secure, and really just honestly built for how people are living in 2026. So I've been a technologist, like you said, for more than 25 years, ever since I founded the first internet service provider in Northeast Ohio when I was a freshman in high school in 1994. I know I just dated myself, but I tell this story because I started the internet service provider because I had a problem. I couldn't get on the internet. And I thought the internet was going to change the world and be this really awesome thing that I wanted to be a part of. But it was a long distance phone call in Geauga County, Ohio in 1994. So my solution was to build technology to get myself online. Ultimately, that became an internet service provider. I got myself online, my family online, my friends online, and then thousands of my closest friends all over Northeast Ohio. So a few years ago, my wife and I decided to revisit our own estate plan. So we had first put an estate plan together about 13 years prior when my first child was born. I think we felt really good about it. We had a great estate planner. We signed that thing. We put that in the drawer and we never really looked at it again. And so probably pretty typical. So when my time at Canonical was wrapping up, it coincided with the birth of our third child. My wife and I decided it was time to update our estate plan. It had been more than a decade. We figured it was about time. So there had been a lot of changes: new home, new children, cars, new location, new houses. Like our whole life had basically changed, and yet our estate plan was accurate as of 13 years ago. So I found a great estate planner, highly recommended, went to his office, had a fantastic meeting, but I noticed that he didn't ask me anything about my technology, about my digital assets. Now, for me, that's things like Bitcoin, Ethereum, sort of cryptocurrency, but it's also a lot more than that. I think by my last count, I have more than 400 online accounts, from social media, online bank accounts, online businesses, source code. I got all kinds of stuff. And I realize I may be a little bit of an outlier as a technologist on that. But I was greatly concerned when this estate planner, who was highly recommended, beautiful office, what he did was he sort of flipped a pad of paper around on the desk and like smoothly slid it over to me and said, just go ahead and write down your digital assets and we'll figure it out. And that just, I couldn't. I didn't know what to say, or I was like, oh yeah, well, let me, I think I was like, oh yeah, I'll do that and get back to you. But I was just caught off guard because I couldn't believe that this was 2023. I couldn't believe that in 2023 this was how this was being done. And so I figured, well, oops, I just must have picked the wrong estate planner. Like somebody's just behind the times, no problem. But then I proceeded to call about 90 estate planners and ask them how they handled this situation. How do they handle digital assets? How do they handle online accounts? And effectively, none of them were handling it. And
Wow.
that caused me to realize, going back to the internet service provider, I have a problem. I can't get my estate plan done properly.
Yeah.
Fix that problem. So I started building some technology to fix the problem, to handle my digital assets. Then it expanded. All of a sudden, my family wanted to have their digital assets handled properly. Then my friends did. And all of a sudden, I realized that there were millions of my closest friends who certainly had the same problem. And it occurred to me that this is not only a problem that I have, but everybody effectively has. There is no good way. There was no good way to really capture your digital life and your digital assets that's part of a proper estate plan. And that is why we founded Eternal Me. That's why we built our core product, Eternal Pro. And that's what I've been working on for the last few years.
When we connected before this conversation, you had touched on this, which, blew my mind because I've been in this space now for about 3.5 years. And I never really appreciated it until I had my daughter, essentially, about planning for an estate. And she's a special needs child. And that's how we got really involved in the space. And then fast forward to me now being involved and helping law firms essentially grow. It's been a great journey, but I'm going to be completely honest with you. Immediately after this call, I'm going to reach out to my attorney because I'm a very tech heavy person. I've got agentic platforms that I've built out now. I've got, a lot of vibe coded businesses essentially that I've started over the years. And none of that is essentially is anywhere on any kind of plan. And so that's why I've been so fascinated by, your track and everything that you've been doing. And I guess a good segue into this, and especially what we've just talked about is, when you look at the average law firm's intake process today, what do you think it starts to break down essentially?
It breaks down on step one.
Yeah, right.
Intake means different things for different law firms. So just to clarify, when we talk about intake, sometimes we're talking about new client intake, like a sales funnel bringing new clients in. That's part of intake. But what we're really focusing on in this conversation, we talk about intake is once you have a client, how do you get their information into your system so you can create that estate plan and manage that estate plan through its life cycle?
Yeah.
But there's two core problems with that. When law firms are using any kind of traditional intake system, whether it's a paper form or a spreadsheet or a Google form or a Cognito form, or even some of the traditional legal tech solutions that I won't necessarily name here, the problem is there's two major problems with that. The first is that they're designed for one-time capture. They're taking a snapshot of somebody's life. The second problem is that they cannot handle digital assets. I was just imagining trying to write either a public or a private key down on a piece of paper.
No way.
Right?
No, yeah.
Or imagine some law firms, some we've seen are actually asking people to put like accounts and passwords in spreadsheets. I mean, that may seem completely reasonable if you don't understand the security implications of that. And even if you don't put passwords in that, even if you just say, hey, just give us a list of accounts on a spreadsheet. Well, now you've just given a potential hacker a complete map of your identity. So all of these traditional intake methods break down when we start thinking beyond single snapshot and when we start thinking about a life cycle of an estate plan. They are simply not built to handle it. They're only built to handle one-time snapshot. Here's how the client is today. So that's obviously the most important thing when we're doing an estate plan, when lawyers are putting these things together. But gosh, it's like no matter how perfect that estate plan ends up, what happens when life happens? Right? Like it falls out of date so very quickly.
Yeah.
And I started asking myself, why? Why did it take 13 years for my wife and I to update our estate plan? That's crazy, right? We had so many changes. We should have been more on top of that. And we're very forward thinking. We like to be very organized with these kind of things. And we tried to actually do an update a few times over the years, but every occasion, the two occasions we did it, it was the same thing. It was like, well, we got to start a whole new process. It's almost like every update requires the entirety of the process to happen again. That's a lot of
Yeah.
time and work and focus and energy that, as parents of 3 children running businesses, we just didn't have until it really got critical, right? Third child and 13 years, so many changes. And by the way, we both had 3 months off of work to think about this.
Yeah, which is not what most people even have that opportunity, right? When I hear things, I'm always like hearing opportunity, right? I'm always hearing about like how, just like you did essentially, when you were going through that journey and that process, you saw something there. I mean, especially after talking to 90 law firms and identifying the fact that none of them were really prepared for the today world, essentially, when it comes to digital assets. How does a weak intake process actually cost firms client and revenue? I guess we could start there.
Yeah. Well, so the biggest problem is the potential gaps now in 2026. So it may not necessarily cost the law firm that client initially. The question is, what happens if you create an estate plan that doesn't include their digital assets? What have you just done? What consequences will the family face? And these are real. I've personally lived this. This isn't me speculating. I started building this platform 3 years ago, but unfortunately, earlier this year in January, my father passed away, and he had used the platform, Eternal Me, with his estate planner to document all of his digital assets. And thank goodness he did. So I was his executor. Boy, I never thought building this thing that my own dad would be the first person to pass away who used our platform, and that I would be the executor. I couldn't have predicted that. And obviously it was very difficult, but I have to tell you how enlightening it was and how it really showed me that in 2026, as an executor, I can't imagine how much more painful it would have been if I didn't have the code to his phone, if I didn't have his Gmail password. Those two simple things would have made this process so much more painful. But by having those securely stored in our system, in a way that automatically transferred to me. My dad didn't want me playing around in his phone, right? He could have just given me his password, right? But he didn't want me playing around in his phone or playing around with his email until the appropriate time. And so that's one of the things our system does is at the appropriate time, it transfers these credentials in a legally compliant way under the Revised Uniform Fiduciary Access to Digital Assets Act, otherwise known as RFADA. It transferred access to these digital assets to me. I was then able, as his executor, to carry out his wishes in a very simple way. So when we talk about revenue for law firms, it's not that first intake that's going to cause problems. It's what happens next. Both the problems that could be being caused for that family. And again, these problems didn't exist 10 years ago when two-factor authentication wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
When almost all of our online lives weren't tied to our email accounts. This wasn't a thing, but now it is.
Yep.
And then the second part where you're losing revenue is the updates. Because every estate planner I've spoken to, I'm going to say not every, 90% of them either do very few plan updates or none at all. Why? Because there's so much friction. Me as a client, I don't want to come back and have to go through another paper intake form. It's a painful process to go through it all. And I just can't, me as a technologist, maybe it's just, also don't want to, why?
Yeah.
If you have my whole estate in there, all I want to do is tell you I have a third child. That's it. That's the only change, right? Or all I want to do is tell you I moved, right? Simple changes end up becoming a whole process. So now the good news is, I don't want to paint this all as bleak, is that we've seen some very, very forward-thinking estate planners out there who are trying to change this, and we've learned some lessons from them on how this works. One of the most exciting ways I've seen law firms successfully generate legitimate revenue streams from what I'm talking about, simply from updates, is by launching these care and maintenance programs. And the idea is, when you do an estate plan for a client, that's step 0. That's literally you're not even at step 1. Step 0 is they have an estate plan. Step 1 is life starts happening. So what you do is you build into your plan an annual recurring component called a care and maintenance plan, where every year, or some people do it every 2 years or even every 6 months, there's a normal process whereby updates are collected and critical plan updates are considered and made. Now, the only way that's viable for either side is if this data is securely stored and in a system and easily updatable. It's, no client is going to pay thousands of dollars every year for an annual plan update. They're not going to do that. And if you're only charging a few $100s, but the lawyer has to spend 4 or 5 hours doing it, then that's a loss of revenue too. That's the disconnect. That's the gap.
Yeah.
But if plan updates can be extremely simple and client driven, supplemented by an automated reminder system, now we're providing real value to our clients. At any time, clients can log back in and make updates, and they know that once a year they're going to get a review and a plan update from their lawyer. And what ends up happening is, we see law firms where every January they get hundreds of thousands of dollars just come in because that's their annual care and maintenance review. Like, boom, they just charge all the guards. All that revenue comes in, and then they wait, because it's still got to be client driven. And most clients actually end up, not having updates every single year. So the economics of this really work for everybody. It's almost like an insurance policy. For a small amount of monthly or for a small annual fee, I can make sure my legit estate plan is legitimately reviewed and updated. And for that same amount of money, the lawyer can legitimately make sure that their clients' plans are in good shape, and they can do it very, very profitably.
So I do a lot of business development with some estate planning firms that, have probably broken through their first $1 million. They've got structures, they've got processes. But the one that I'm always love having fun with is how do you increase the lifetime value of the client that you serve one time, right? How do you how do you provide a system and structure that's simple and it's great for your client, that they love so much what you do that they refer business your way, which is one opportunity. And on the other is this life care planning process, essentially, which is like a monthly small retainer fee to a yearly annual due, essentially. And you get a lot more than just checking in with the attorney at the end of the year. And I think the most recent statistic I pulled, essentially, from all the just straight estate planning and elder law firms out there in the US, I think about maybe only 7% of law firms throughout the nation offer some kind of and this is over 10,000 firms, essentially, offer some level of life care planning. And I've always been fascinated by it. I don't think it's a core gap in the training. I think it's a technology solution, which is, how do I make this worthwhile where I am not spending a lot of my time, essentially. And so something I've just got completely caught off guard with, and this conversation with you, is not really thinking about the fact of how do you make systems and processes one thing, but having a reliable technology solution that can allow you to take the initiative to get involved in this space as well. So,
I think you nailed it. The problem is that it takes too much lawyer time right now to do a proper update for their plan. The economics does not work. You have to have a tool to facilitate that. Or on the other end of the spectrum, you have to have clients that are comfortable, doing the whole process again. And, those tend to be maybe higher, very high net worth individuals where, the cost of doing the plan is less important than getting it absolutely perfect. But with a tool, whether it's, Eternal Pro or any of the other solutions out there, with a tool that facilitates that, then what happens is the lawyer's time diminishes to a manageable amount. And with that minimal amount of time, they can provide a much higher amount of ongoing value. And I think that's what we're talking about as part of that living estate. Instead of looking at it like this, we're going to take a snapshot and do a perfect plan. It's like, we're going to take a snapshot, we're going to do a perfect plan, and then we're going to continually do snapshots and continually make this thing, not like every day. We're going to regularly take snapshots and regularly update this as part of a client life cycle. That provides a lot more opportunities for revenue, whether it's, care and maintenance programs or sort of monthly programs, or even whether it's just flat out, when you're ready for an update, we have an optimized, effective, simple, easy way for you to do it. Just log in here and give us your updates. It's a small fixed fee, for example. That's the other problem when you're doing an update. It's like, how much is this going to cost? Well, we don't know. Give us all your information. You got your own life you want to try to live. Here's what we want you to do. Spend hours going through the entire intake process again, and then we'll tell you how much it's going to cost to get your plan updated. Seriously, I just can't do it. I can't do it.
Yeah. No, I agree. And then I guess, I have a two-folded question on this next one, which is on one side, do you think the lack of attorneys really seeing the importance of this is a derivative of the fact that we're still going through the silver wave, that it's the boomer generation essentially, that a majority of what they focus on is that typical avatar of a client. Maybe for a lot of them specifically, they may or may not have a lot in digital assets. And if you don't believe that's the case, what kind of questions can an attorney be asking, again, to identify this opportunity? Once they are working, let's say, with your solution, essentially.
I think attorneys deeply understand the problem. I don't think I'm dropping knowledge on a whole class of attorneys here. I learned this from them.
Yeah.
I think attorneys understand this as a problem. I think there hasn't been a clear answer. I hear it a lot from attorneys I speak with all the time, which is, well, my clients are older, they don't have digital assets. Or I love this one. Nobody's ever asked me about digital assets. So the questions you should be asking are do you have a smartphone? Do you have an email? If the answer to either of those is yes, then you have digital assets that have to be taken care of in 2026 as part of an estate. That's it. And I'm going to bet you that 99.99999 plus percent of your clients have one of those.
Yeah.
So that's the question. And if they have one of those, then follow that logically. Where do you store the code? There's two different problems here with digital assets. There's legal access and there's functional access. I could legally have every right to access that email or that phone and have zero functional ability to get there. I could have every functional ability to get there and no legal ability to get there. That's actually why our business is B2B. We work only with lawyers. We don't, there's not like a consumer, as a consumer, you can't sign up for our service, because to really make this work, you have to cover both the legal and the functional aspect. Okay, great. So your client has a cell phone and an email account. Legally, where does the authorization go? Okay, you figured that out. Great. Functionally, who stores the password? Where? And how do we make sure that password only gets to the executor at the right time? Because, like my dad, he doesn't want me snooping around in his email while I'm around. But when he passed away, obviously he needs me as his executor to get that access. So, I think this isn't a situation where the lawyers don't get it. I think they deeply understand the problem. And I think there just hasn't been a lot, great solutions to this yet. Just very simple. Like, we talk about digital assets, everybody goes straight to Bitcoin and crypto. And yeah, those are worth a lot of money. And any lawyer with clients who have major portfolios really need to dive deep into that. But that's still right now just going to be a small portion of your client base. Whereas, again, 99% of everybody's plus percent of everybody's going to have a smartphone. They're going to have email. And those have to be covered. If you cover nothing else, cover email and smartphone, and then follow that to conclusion. Where do you store it for safe transfer, and how do you legally authorize it? Those are the two wedges. So, I think that's where it starts.
When we have this conversation, it makes sense. Do you have an iPhone? Do you have an email? Do you think that the processes internally in a firm level require a lot more, like a lot of effort, essentially, to ensure that this is just very smooth?
There's some effort for sure.
Yeah.
But at least with our platform, and there are a few other solutions now that have developed, but at least with our platform, actually what we start with is your existing intake form.
Okay.
Like literally, after you make a purchase, the first question is, if you feel comfortable, send us your intake form as it is now. But a lot of law firms have a very specific intake form that aligns with their internal workflow and their internal processes. Probably that intake form over time, a lot of them feel really good about it because they're very specific to what they're trying to do. So we wanted to be very careful not to upend that or mess with that. So the first question we ask, send us your intake form. We build it directly into our intake system so that our intake system works as close to your current processes as possible. And then we just add those two questions: smartphone, email. That's it. So from a intake perspective, the law firm their intake process is going to be almost identical to the way it was before. It's just going to be more secure, online, and it's going to include some of the digital, we recommend We recommend
Yes.
it includes the digital asset component. We do have some law firms who aren't quite ready for it yet because it does take some time. I mean, if you're not ready to advise a client on what to do with that cell phone or what to do with that email account, then some internal sort of training may be required to get to that point. So we work with our law firms where they are now to step them ahead. We want to get their intake system into a modern, living intake, and then we want to bring digital assets into the equation. But that doesn't all have to happen at once. It's
Yes.
sort of a progression over time. So we try to make that as easy as possible.
What does the future essentially look like for intake when it comes to estate planning over the next few years and going into the future?
So intake is going to largely stay the same. We still have these fundamental issues. We got to get information from the client. We got to securely store it, and we got to use that to create an estate plan. And ideally, we got to have a way to update it later.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the methods are going to change, right? Like right now, our system is like a wizard system, like a TurboTax for estate planning is kind of how it's built. One question at a time, bubble at a time, blah 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 blah. But we also already have a working chat style intake you can use. So like if you want your client to do an intake by just having like a chat with somebody, the system can take all that and can structure it into the structured data properly, and put that in the, securely store it, use that for the plan, use that for updates, something. So I think the human machine interface is going to change. Will it be, bubbles, or will it be AI chats? So I think that's what's going to change. The way we get this information is going to change, but the core tenets are going to stay the same. Collect the information, securely store it, create a estate plan, provide a way to update it.
And so I guess as this conversation is winding down, and I've loved every second of it, we're going to definitely have to follow each other's journey and continue talking about things.
Sounds great.
But, for the attorneys and the firm owners listening, what is the one mindset shift you hope that they would take away from our conversation today?
Have a solution for smartphones and email.
Yeah.
Have a solution for that. And, if your solution is not one of the modern sort of secured intake platforms, be concerned. It really does need to be, this information really does need to be handled very, very sensitively. That's my immediate reaction. But if I had to take another step back, what I would say is actually the one thing I think they should take away is I think the future of this industry is bright.
Yeah. Yeah.
I actually really think it is.
I agree.
And I think this is one of the very few spaces that AI is not going to really damage. I'm going to say damage. It's going to disrupt. There's going to be changes and better tools and tech. But at the end of the day, my family is always going to want to trust a real estate planner with this. And I think most families will. So I actually think, this is an insulated industry. I think the future is bright. And I think the way forward is to start looking at how we can use some of this new tech to better serve clients to generate more revenue.
Richard, before I end this, how do I find you? How do I reach out to you? I'll leave you with that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. You can find more about Eternal Me at eternal.me. And we have all of our information there. Anyone is always also welcome to email me at richard@eternal.me.
Awesome. Richard, thank you so much for your time. What a great conversation.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you, Jason. Take care.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Elder Law Growth Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things marketing for elder law and estate planning law firms. Here you can find all of the tools and skills you need to market your own practice without wasting your time. If you like this podcast, please leave us a review wherever you're listening. And if you're ready to take the pressure off and let our team handle your marketing, visit Bambiz.net and book a free call with us today.